RT sitting down with author, investigative journalist, and contributing editor to Rolling Stone magazine, Matt Taibbi. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's get right into it. You've dedicated a large part of your work and your career to discovering and investigating the events that led up to the economic crisis of '08 and the events that happened after and during that whole chaos. And my question to you is, where does everyone stand now? It really looks like the politicians have moved on, Wall Street has moved on certainly from that whole extravaganza, and yet we have millions of people left basically to mend for themselves. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think we're at a period now, we're kind of at a crossroads where if the government moves forward and doesn't make major changes and doesn't press forward with wide-scale prosecutions, I think this is kind of like their last opportunity to do that. For the last 3 years or so, they haven't taken anybody to court at all. There's really been no law enforcement whatsoever, and I think that's something that people are talking about a lot on Wall Street. They're kind of wondering when, you know, the other shoe is going to drop. And I personally am hopeful that they actually will do something. It's too late, but at least it will come eventually.
Better than nothing, right?
Right.
Now, it's interesting, been over 2 years, and a lot of people, politicians, people in the media are saying, you know, it's time to move on. Let's kind of start growing again and stop talking about the economic collapse. Are you still angry? And who is your anger directed at?
That whole attitude, well, it's already over, let's not bother going back and, you know, stirring up, you know, the hornet's nest of, you know, all these troubles that are in the past. I think that that's a really dangerous attitude, because the number one thing that came out of this whole period is that there were absolutely no consequences for any of the people who committed this wide-scale fraud. We had these massive bailouts, and there's an enormous amount of public anger about that. If you couple the bailouts with the lack of law enforcement and the lack of prosecutions, there's really no incentive going forward for people on Wall Street not to commit crimes, especially if they're incredibly profitable. You know, if people on Wall Street look at that and they say, hey, if I rip off, you know, a pension fund or an insurance company or a foreign bank or a foreign hedge fund, there will be absolutely no consequences.
So basically the only lesson they've learned is that they can do anything and get away with anything, and that's just
right.
The bottom line.
And even if it all blows up, even if we bet completely wrong, you know, the worst case scenario is that the government is going to come in and bail us out with taxpayer money.
If you could literally describe the relationship between Wall Street and Washington in one sentence, really, what would that?
It's completely commingled. It's a revolving door of interests where people on Wall Street are either directly sponsoring the politicians in Washington with campaign contributions and soft money and that sort of thing, or else they are actually politicians.
Who or what can really change that? Who has the power to do it? Who has the force to do it? And, you know, who would be interested in changing that whole
Well, voters
way of life?
Obviously have the ability to make those changes. They have the ability to not choose politicians who are beholden to Wall Street, theoretically. But the problem is Wall Street heavily sponsors both the Republican and the Democratic parties. So automatically, no matter who becomes the front-running candidate for the presidency, is going to be a creature of Wall Street. Look at Barack Obama, who I personally admired during his campaign of 2008, but if you look at his record, Goldman Sachs was his #1 private campaign contributor.